Hey there, Transformers. Welcome to Work Transformed, the podcast that tackles the ever-evolving world of product development, project chaos, and everything in between. Each episode, we'll dive into the hottest trends, unpack the latest tools, and chat with inspiring guests who are leading the charge. So, buckle up, get ready to transform your work, and let's do this.
Hey, Transformers. Welcome to another week's episode of Work Transformed with your, I was going to say guest host, but that's not what I meant to say. I was just going to say your regular host, your everyday run-of-the-mill host, Thomas Lenore and Jackie Bittner. And we are talking about what I'm sure many of you face on a somewhat repeated basis, and that is imposter syndrome. We were talking about this earlier, and I don't know why this song came into my head because the words are not even about imposter syndrome, but it's like, imposter syndrome, how many of us have it? Imposter syndrome. Anyhow, that's the kind of mood I'm in right now, just like making up random songs with words that don't belong. So
Wow.
let's go. Let's hop right in. But no, I think this is gonna be a good episode because I think this is something that's unfortunately plaguing people regardless of where they are in their career. I mean, I think a lot of folks graduate from college and go into their first job and have a bit of imposter syndrome because they're not, certain that they're able to live up to whatever the roles are. But you'd imagine the longer your career, the less of that you have. But I'd argue that has not been my experience. So I think people can relate to this. Jackie, have you ever felt like you were an imposter?
I feel like I'm an imposter host.
No, I am too this week because we're only supposed to be having guest hosts apparently.
Oh yeah, guest host, imposter. Yes, Thomas, I feel imposter syndrome quite frequently, and there are ways to combat it, but I felt that way in my roles. I felt that way even in things that I knew I was good at. Like, you have these moments of this self-doubt or this like fear that creeps in that someone's gonna find out you don't know what you're doing, but that's usually it's okay.
Isn't that a weird thing? Like, I have been in the same field of work my entire professional career, and every now and then I go into this meeting where I'm supposed to be the expert, and I'm like, what if someone realizes I don't know what I'm talking about? And they're like, why would they realize it's not true? I absolutely do know, but like, I still wonder because I'm like, oh, I'm saying all these things. What if they're not true? I don't know where that comes from.
I mean, it's a huge topic. I know that I've had like friends share with me like TED Talks and things about imposter syndrome because they feel it too. I do feel like a lot of times imposter syndrome comes in when you do something brand new, and I'll use a non-work example. The garbage truck book that I'm trying so desperately to create for my child. I was starting it, knowing that I wanted to like write the words and do the drawings and all of this. I felt like there was no place that I was going to be able to start. So I just started. And like throughout the whole process, even though like I would make a really cool background and feel good about that one background, I still was like, but a whole book, but an entire book. And it wasn't until just recently I'm working on like the final edits of everything that I was like, wait, I can write a children's book. I've been literally working on this thing for over a year, and I just had this thought like this week. I can write this and illustrate this. So imposter syndrome, be gone. Although you will come back in some other way. And I think like one of the ways to combat it is to just do the thing, even if you're scared, even if you don't know what you're doing.
The thing. I love it.
Yes, and like for the critics.
For you.
Yeah, well, and like there's critics out there, like you get an like writing a children's book seemingly seems super duper easy, and I'm gonna just share from my experience. It is not super duper easy, especially when you're trying to compile like what side of the page do you want that one to be on, or how many verses does that song need to have, or I can't draw this truck. I need someone to help me, and it's just like totally, like the critics, that's what I was talking about. I've had people say, "You're not done with that yet." And my immediate thing is like, have you written a children's book? Do you have any advice? Or can you just not give
And
me
they probably
that
haven't even,
criticism?
they haven't even read a children's book before, let alone written one.
But yeah, it lives in lots of places.
Well, it's
I
interesting you
have
talk
like a
about the critics because I think for me, what I first thought about is like you're your own worst critic. We know that, like that comes up. That's a well-known fact for most people. You're your own worst critic. But I think that that imposter syndrome surely doesn't help because you're already hard on yourself. You already want to be the best and like always prove that you have what it takes to play at whatever level you're playing at. And then for this imposter syndrome to creep in the middle of you having this pep talk with yourself and say, but what if you aren't smart enough? What if you don't know this? What if you aren't, the right person for this job or this role or this opportunity? Like that sucks. It almost reminds me a little bit of depression. And I'm not saying they're at all alike. I don't want anyone to like write me and say like that is totally different. I know it's totally different. But when I think of depression, I think of it's like a dark haze coming over the room that is the inside of my brain. And like I feel like imposter syndrome is similar. It's like, oh, things are now getting foggy because like maybe I'm not the right person. And so I'm like, you literally have to just push through that and get to just doing it and not even doing the right thing, just doing something. Because to your point, I think the only way you get over imposter syndrome is not to try to figure out the right words to tell yourself. It's like to just prove it to yourself. And that's easier said than done.
You know, you said imposter syndrome and like depression, and I kind of like digested that as, oh, imposter syndrome really sucks out the joy of doing the things, right? Like really
Yes,
sucks out
sometimes
your
it does.
enjoyment of it. I also realized that imposter syndrome for me creeps in it like during times of ambiguity. So like on one hand, I love working in ambiguity because you get to be creative, you get to find solutions. But then I think when you don't have the answer, imposter syndrome's like knocking on the door, like, ha ha ha, I'm here. You don't have the answer. You can't be this kind of person. You can't do this kind of role. Um, so does imposter syndrome, so it has a link to critics, right? Critics fuel our imposter syndrome, especially our own internal critic. Um, Sucking out the joy of things that we actually enjoy fuels imposter syndrome. And then does like not knowing or the unknown fuel it? I think that is
I'm
something
sure
that
it
I would be
does.
curious.
I'm sure it does. I mean, I think the triggers can be different for different folk. Because even when you were talking, another thing that I know that triggered it for me is
Mm-hmm.
this like sense of comparison. Because
Ooh.
you know, I think when I am in a situation where I feel inferior to others, that's when the imposter syndrome kicks in. Like I'm in a room with all these people who have these Ivy League degrees and they, have masters and PhD. And like you're in this room of all these really smart people who have the credentials of whatever sort to back it up. And then it's just little old me. Like how it's almost like how could I ever even imagine I would fit in this room? Like I am nowhere near qualified or accomplished enough to sit amongst these people. Uh, like that, I don't think that's true. I think that is just the imposter syndrome, like rearing its ugly head. But like that's how it sometimes manifests for me. It's like Thomas, why do you even think that you deserve to be able to speak in this meeting? Like these people obviously know far more than you. And it's like yes, but if they knew everything, they would not have invited me. I am obviously invited because there's some thing, whether it be knowledge, whether it be my ability to ask really helpful questions that really just are powerful questions that anyone could ask. Like there is some reason these people thought, let's add Thomas to this meeting. It's like that's one another thing I do to shut my imposter syndrome up sometimes. I'm like, well, let's just see. Like there must be something they wanted. Let's figure out what that is.
That's true. Like one way to combat it is like, oh, they wanted me here. There is a reason. Get away from me,
Mm-hmm.
imposter syndrome. I was also like thinking about that. We talked about it a little bit. I can't remember what podcast it's in, but like being able to be brave and say I don't know, or like something that I do to combat imposter syndrome is I'll say, "Hey, I feel like a novice. Explain it to me like I don't know something." Because a lot of times in the meetings and forums we're facilitating, usually someone's trying to get a very complex point across. And by like kind of switching the gears and taking ownership of the fact that I don't know, it really helps drive some clarity. So I guess as with anything, how do we take our imposter syndrome and use it as an opportunity to one, maybe get to more self-confidence, two, like tackle our mental health and be like, we can do this. And three, like, how do you use it to your benefit? I don't know.
Ooh, those are some tough questions. The first thing that came to mind though, when you're like, how can we use it to our benefit? It's like
Yeah.
one of the things that I think probably would help. I know this is me totally speculating, so I've never done this before, but I think sometimes we are. If I go back to that example of I'm in a room with all these Ivy League scholars and
Hmm.
we're trying to problem solve, and I don't know why, and they would invite someone of my caliber and lower pedigree. If I don't
Oh
know,
God.
maybe what I could do is just ask, "Hey, I'd love to just go around the room and kind of establish roles and expectations. Like, I know we have finance here, and finance's job is going to be to help us to identify this thing. And we got such and such here. Like, I just want to make sure I understand, like, what do we expect each group to kind of contribute to the conversation? And that way, hopefully, someone will say, like, and Thomas, you're here because we want you to blank. And not only will it help to calm you down and help to bring down some of that anxiety that you're feeling, it'll also help to establish clear ground rules for everyone. So going back to that meeting facilitation conversation we had a couple weeks ago on the podcast, this is not a technique to combat imposter syndrome, but I think it's something that would help it if you're like, hey, let's all delineate what is the reason we're having this meeting, and then what do we think each of us can contribute. That can help you individually say, okay, this is what they wanted from me, and I do feel like I'm qualified to respond to that or to do that or to help in that way.
Oh, just
I don't
like
know if that
setting
makes
some
sense.
time. Yeah, setting some time to really just like ask what the expectations are,
Mm-hmm.
which takes bravery.
It's a lot
Um,
of bravery.
yeah. As we were kind of going through this, I thought again about like the thing that pops up for me every time is that like not having the knowledge or like there's like something super ambiguous. And I started thinking about the art of like getting to good enough. I'm gonna do like a little book drop. I don't know if we've probably talked about this book, but you know that book Ish, The Power with the
Mm-hmm.
Pursuit of Perfection. Um, I'm curious now. I wonder if like I mean that book has helped me tremendously with to stop my wheels from spinning on whatever it was I was creating because before I felt like this thing had to be perfect otherwise I was not worthy to show it off. And really is it's like battling perfection. Like you have to battle against this like ideal or ideology of perfection that's out there and say, hey, this is good enough. I am good enough to be in this room. I am good enough to participate in this conversation. And I am good enough to know when I don't know something so I could say it out loud.
You
Do
know,
you
that's
ever feel
interesting.
like a
This idea
perfectionist?
of good enough. Oh, I do often feel like a perfectionist, primarily because I am, especially when it's like a team sport, because I am a perfectionist at heart, but not in reality. But when I have a team of other people who can really like do the stuff, then I am a real perfectionist. Well,
Oh, wow.
your ish book description made me think of another technique for combating imposter syndrome, and this is what I have done before. If I'm really, really feeling imposter syndrome and feeling out of my depth, I'll sometimes just be really quiet. Like I'm totally plugged in. It's almost like I don't know if we've talked about this on the podcast, but active listening. We usually refer to active listening as like a thing, but there are actually levels to active listening: level one, level two, and level three listening. And level one
Mm-hmm.
is like the superficial listening to respond, just trying to like figure out what they're saying so you can say something back. Level two is like listening to understand, and level three is listening to internalize. And so,
Mm-hmm.
and it's very hard to get to level three. Level three is like the best, but it's like really hard. And I really try to find myself in like level two, level three teetering spot when I'm in this point of imposter syndrome. Because what I always tell myself is if I can find just that one way to contribute value, even if it's like one observation, one comment, one question, like don't feel like I have to be the rock star of this meeting because there are a ton of smart people here. I just want to listen and truly internalize everything that people are saying so I can find that one moment to say, hey, I actually have been listening so well that I heard each of you say this thing that I don't know if you all realize that you all said. and here's what this might mean. And like, even if I do that, even though, and in that scenario, I didn't contribute anything per se. Like, I didn't say anything. I didn't have any thoughts or hypotheses or, suggestions. I'm just saying, I heard you all say this, but I don't think you all each have heard this. And so, like, that is my contribution. And that imposter syndrome kind of brings me to this quiet place so I can, at worst case scenario, if I have no bright ideas, at least I can regurgitate someone else's and throw it out
Oh,
there.
but that's so interesting. So the levels of listening, the first one is listening to respond, which we want to discourage in this scenario. The second one is listening to learn, right? What was the third one? You said listening to internalize?
That's what I said. I don't know if that's like the actual name. I'm gonna look it up while we're talking. But yeah,
Oh,
it's like
okay.
deep listening. Like, keep going.
Yeah, no, so I was just thinking about like getting quiet. Like that's not a bad thing, especially when you come back with like some keen observation. And to your point, it kind of ties back with that not knowing things or being in this ambiguous situation. I guess people with this project management, agile, change management like background, a lot of times we find ourselves in these scenarios where we are facilitating these like very detailed conversations where we do have an important voice at the table, and like being able to be quiet and notice like those subtleties because you were quiet and listening to what not only what people were saying but how people were responding to what people were saying and how people were like their body language changed when things and there's an art to that. And so
Well,
you ever
that's
feel
actually
like those
perfect
colleagues, those Ivy League guys? Yeah.
because that's what the third level of listening is. So level one, they don't have names. So I made the names. Level one is listening to your inner voice, like listening to what I think based on what people are saying. So it's not really listening at all, in my opinion, but it's like listening to something. Level two is listening to identify and internalize another person's perspective. And then level three is listening to others to understand not only what they're saying, but the context of and your surroundings. So it's, what are people saying? What are people's facial expressions? How are people reacting? What are their follow-up questions and thoughts? So it's really listening to take the whole thing in with no expectation that you'll use this information for anything else. And so what you're saying is spot on. It's like, you have to transcend just listening to the words people are saying, but you have to see, like, are they themselves even saying it confidently? Maybe that's something you point out, like, well, you didn't seem very confident when you said that. And I noticed a lot of people were like very hesitant to agree. And so, like, maybe we aren't as aligned on this as possible. And again, it's like, my contribution here may not be knowledge. And that's where that imposter syndrome can trip you up, because it might convince you you're not the smartest person in the room, and you probably aren't. And so that could, like, once you realize, oh, I am really not the smartest person, you're like in this downward spiral. And it's like, maybe I'm not the smartest, but maybe I have other talents or gifts I can use. What
I
are they?
think, yeah, I think maybe like the biggest piece of advice I like right now, or the strongest tool, is the levels of listening when you're feeling this imposter syndrome, because you can implement, like, if you've never done like very mindful and purposeful practice with the levels of listening, one, I would encourage you to do that. But two, this is something that you can do at any moment. So if you find yourself in these conversations and you're like, I don't know what to say to this topic matter, you don't have to panic. You can switch modes and say, I'm going to listen now. I'm going to figure this out. And that will keep that imposter syndrome at bay. Ah, I love this. Do you remember that exercise we did at the boot
Which
camp?
one?
The levels of listening one.
No.
So
That's
long time.
embarrassing to say, but I remember the boot camp. I don't remember that exercise. But to
Well,
be fair, we
we
also did a
weren't
ton of
in.
exercises. So.
I was gonna say there was a ton of exercises, and you and I were not in the same boot camp, so they may have done things in a slightly different order than they did with us. But one of the things that we had done, and this is what I mean by practicing, we really focused just on the first two levels of listening. So first is the listening to respond, and then the second one is the listening to learn, if you will, what others are saying and what their points are before you respond. And I can't remember the exact exercise, but you partner up with somebody that you trust or that you care about, and you just start talking about a random topic. You pick one together that you're gonna focus on. And the idea is that when the other person is talking, you have to go in your brain, in your head, and just then and like identify if you're feeling the need to respond right now or if you're actually listening to what they're saying. And it's so cool because you're really flexing a piece of brain muscle that you're not really noticing until you start to notice it. And once you start to notice what you're doing, then in these like other scenarios, when you're in that meeting talking about that complicated, what clusters do we spin up, Thomas? Oh my gosh, I don't know. Like you could sit back and listen to that conversation and know if you're trying to respond or trying to actually internalize what they're saying to provide more context to that conversation. So that's what I mean by practice. Find a partner. Find somebody that will be forgiving if you end up not hearing a word they're saying because you're all in your head trying to figure out if you're trying to respond or trying to internalize it.
I've been quiet because I've been trying to internalize this, but then this like squeaky voice in the back of my head keeps piping up and distracting me because I keep thinking of like, this works well if you're in a group because you can kind of blend in. If you're in a meeting and there's 6 of you all, you can be quiet for a long time before people notice that you haven't said. If you're in a one-on-one conversation, this can't work, right? This is impossible. And the more I'm like think about it, the more I'm like, this could work well. Actually, you'd be surprised how much people like to talk and hear their own voice, but you'd also be surprised how much people will share and problem solve themselves if you just give them time and space. And this is actually like a therapy technique. But sometimes if you just every now and then drop in with an occasional or or wow, just like some kind of filler to let them know that you're still there. Like you haven't started like, thinking about like random things in your head. Like you're listening, but you are waiting on them to finish. Sometimes they'll say, but now that I think about it, this won't work because of this reason, or oh, but we did try that. And like they'll start problem solving these things on their own. And it's also okay, you're in a situation where they finally do pause and they're looking at for you for some feedback for you to say, that's a tough one. And then take another pause because they might start just talking again.
This is true. And what you're describing, I know you said it's like a therapist technique, but it's also like what differentiates mentoring from coaching. Like you're just coaching. You're not giving the answer. You're just giving subtle encouragements. Oh, tell me more about that, or asking the powerful questions to coach people through. And I feel like coaching is one of those skills that when you have it, people don't see it as like glaring because it's supposed to be this kind of supporting role and not the superstar of the moment.
Yeah. So I
Coaching.
think that's been a lot. That was a lot right there. Just like we went from imposter syndrome to when you're in this moment of self-doubt, just be quiet, be still, just give yourself the space to listen to others, to now you can help coach people through. Wow, look at how imposter syndrome can actually like pivot you to the front of the room. Then you're the trusted advisor, the person who's well thought out because they help problem solve so well. Oh, excuse me, so well.
Oh, that's cool. This is a good way to combat imposter syndrome. So try not to be a perfectionist, be an improvementist. Make sure you're using your levels of listening and coaching. Get a coach. Be a coach. Although the coaching thing's a little complicated because if people don't want to be coached, it doesn't really work.
Well, I also think that the coaching part is better if you do it more subtly anyway, because like some people want to be coached, they'll come to you and say that, but like other people, you don't want to overtly be like, let me coach you through this. Like sometimes you just want to take the softer approach and just ask them those powerful questions or give them that space without saying like, this is what I'm doing. But that actually made me think about people who, we've talked a lot about like what does it look like and feel like when we have imposter syndrome, and I haven't even told any of my stories. But I think where I guess I'll share some stories now is around like when others have imposter syndrome, because being a talent multiplier, someone who has managed other folks' career and things of that nature, it sometimes becomes evident to you when others are going through these positions of imposter syndrome where they get a new role and you promoted them and then they're just struggling and you give them a task that they could knock out of the ballpark, but for some reason they aren't knocking out of the ballpark. And so I think sometimes we overlook or underestimate how big of a deal imposter syndrome can be to others. And so I think we also should talk about, like, what do we do when we notice a colleague or a direct report is having a hard time with a new role, a new opportunity, etc.
That's a good question. As a talent multiplier person myself, I wanted to ask or call out, not ask, just observe, really. We keep
You can
bringing back
ask,
powerful
call out,
questions.
observe, whatever you want. Do it.
We keep bringing back powerful questions, and these seem to be such a ready at the hand way to start at least navigating how to problem solve whatever that problem is that we're facing. So, this scenario is you have someone that is in a new role and that you could tell that they are struggling with imposter syndrome. What do you do? And I think the first thing that I would do is probably in a one-on-one, start asking them some powerful questions, like what happens if you don't do XYZ, or depending on whatever the topic is. And I guess the sideline to that for me, that I'm a human type of human, a human type of person. I'll give them some space to like vent it out. Like, tell me what you're feeling. What I'm seeing is someone who is approaching this problem with like hesitancy or with like a gentle touch. Like normally you're, you know, strong-willed and very confident in your speech, what's going on, so that they have room to say, I'm feeling this. And you could say, oh, that's imposter syndrome and it's not real. Throw it out the door. Like, it is real, but you are not an imposter. And here's why, right? Like figuring out what they need to do to change the way that inner critic is working and tell that inner critic to knock it off.
Well, I think the other thing that's really important, and I know it helps me personally, and it's, different structure, different folks. So I'm not saying one size fits all here. But one thing that's really important is that reassurance, because especially if
Yeah.
this is the person who's having some imposter syndrome because of a new role or a recent promotion or something like that, like you may need to remind them why they are in that role. Because I've promoted people before who were less qualified in terms of certifications or years of experience and tenure and things like that than someone else on the team, because they had other things that person or those people did have. And so if they are struggling with imposter syndrome, it may be coming from a place of true analytical, like thinking, like, I don't understand why I got this. It does not make sense. I don't have these things that these other people have. And so you may need to actually share with them, hey, I just want you to know, even though you're feeling, whatever word they use, you're feeling unconfident, you're feeling like you're not qualified or prepared or whatever they said to you, even though you're feeling this way, I want to share with you that I have a lot of confidence that you're going to do well in this role because blank. I promoted you intentionally because you had these skills or these qualities that I think are really important for a person to be effective in this role. So know that you have my support, and however you need me to help you or assist you or provide feedback, I'm here for you. Like sometimes just telling people that they are there for a reason, it was not by accident or by chance, and knowing that they have your support can go a long, long way.
I think that's true. The support too, like, is really great, especially when you have, again, a safe, like psychological safety with a person where you can just mess up. You know what I mean? Like just totally, totally bomb it. Like okay, here's a personal story of imposter syndrome. I have led a lot of workshops now in my career, but the first one that I did, I was so nervous. I was nervous I was going to forget the content I was presenting, even though I knew it. I was nervous about how I structured the workshop. Did I put in enough breaks? I mean, I did so much prep, and the person that was helping me through all of it was always right there, always available if I wanted to like take 5 minutes and run through a section and say, this is how I want to present this section. You know what I mean? Like someone to give me that crisp and fast feedback as I was doing this. And even during that workshop, it was so fun and it was so hilarious and it was so worthy of the information. But even while I was standing there and I was doing this facilitating, I was so nervous. But that energy from that imposter syndrome, that nervous energy, really helped me focus, which I did not expect. to happen. I was actually thinking like, oh, this is gonna bomb and I'm gonna have to tap out. Like, and that's the other thing ultimately is I had a safety net. If things went so sideways and I had to tap out, my other person was there and she would have tapped in and, we would have then had lots of conversations about how that could have gone better and what could I have tried differently and what like what was I feeling and how was it, being received and all of that. And so, but now when I'm doing a workshop, it's like changed from this like scary imposter thing to this like super exciting thing because now I know I get to be in front of people and I get to pick their brains because all the things we do are super interactive. I get to learn because I'm sure there's 25,000 things that are going to come up that I don't even know about. And instead of feeling like I'm bad because I don't know about it, now I feel like super positive to ask more questions because if I don't know, other people probably don't know too. So I think maybe practice is a thing
Ooh, but
that
that
helps.
still requires that bravery that we talked about earlier, like asking questions because you don't know. Yes, other people don't know, but other people are not brave enough to say they don't know. And so like now it's acceptable that everyone doesn't know, wink wink, but they all know.
Have
And so
you
I think that's a go ahead.
have you ever asked a question that you didn't know and like had somebody like explain it to you, but like also had the rest of the room like, yeah, duh. Like I don't think I've ever had that scenario play out. It's
No, no
always
one's ever
met
been
with
like, we all know this. And even the questions that like I really, really thought everyone knew, like, what is this acronym that multiple of you all have used? So like since multiple people use it, I'm sure all of us know what it is. And like I've been in rooms where even the people who use it didn't know. They're like, well, I don't know. It's like the tool that we use. I don't know what it stands for. And it's like, oh, okay, well,
oh
why
my
you
gosh.
all don't know? Because I don't know either.
Okay, so at my first job, tons of acronyms, no clue what they meant, super scared to ask. I was like looking for glossaries and I was looking for all this stuff. And then when I got a new job in my very young and naive brain, I was like, whew, no more acronyms. I was
Young and
wrong.
naive.
If there is like, I guess, okay, second best piece of advice, as you come across acronyms at your company, just ask what they mean because, even if it's like a simple one, you could say, oh my gosh, I'm an acronym overload, right? Like it's totally fine. Just ask.
Or just don't
Um,
apologize along, like, oh yeah, thanks. But yes,
yeah.
I mean, like, I have never been in a situation. I shouldn't say never, but nothing comes to mind. I feel like it would if I had been in a situation where I asked a question and people just looked at me like, this idiot doesn't know this. Because I think there's just this understanding, like, no one can absorb every fact and every piece of information. Like, even the CEO of a company, whether it's a huge
Right.
company or a super small company, they likely don't know every single person's job, every single tool or process, every single thing that they do. Like, that's too much for a human being's brain to hold. Like, even the person who knows a lot will never know everything.
We need to
And so
come
it's
up with
okay.
more acronyms.
No, no more acronyms. We don't need anything more.
Let's just start only speaking in acronyms like LLL. That'll be the levels of listening, like level 1, 2, and 3. No, I'm
Oh,
gonna.
yeah, we're gonna just schedule that for a future podcast. Put that in the parking lot and leave it.
We'll do a whole episode on the acronyms we came up with.
Yes, with a special guest host when I'm out sick.
Oh man, I acronyms though, so young, so naive, thought they were gone.
But I think
Silly.
acronyms can induce this imposter syndrome. Like when we talk about when people have PTSD, I don't know why I'm coming up with all these like very sad things because I
Do
talked
you
about depression
know
first. Now,
what's
do
funny
I know
about
what? Now I'm
PTSD
nervous.
is that it's an acronym.
Oh, yes, post traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. I brought it up because when people have PTSD, they often have like a trigger, like something that like reminds them of whatever the traumatic event was, and like that can cause them to go into a spiral. And I think uh imposter syndrome can have triggers as well. Like I
Hmm.
think acronym overload can lead to like triggering your imposter syndrome. You're like, I must not deserve to be here because like there's all these things that I don't know, like the TSB and the MRI and the CSV, like all these
Oh,
things. Am I right from a medical facility, a CSV from a export database export, and a I don't know what the person was, TSI. I don't know what that is, training sheet information. Anyway, I think
oh
that
my
could be a
God.
trigger for the imposter syndrome as well. So to the point you made a second ago, where like I just asking what these things mean before you get triggered, just say like, "Hey, what does this mean?" Don't want to get too far in the meeting before we like discuss this. That might help you as an individual to say like, "Oh, now I won't be overwhelmed."
Honestly, the hardest people to ask the acronym question to are people that use it with such a high level of confidence that you're like, should I know this? Right? You do like a little bit of a double take. I loved our sales team at my last organization, but sometimes they would say things and I'm like, what? What was that acronym? And luckily, fortunately, as y'all may have heard, I had a very good colleague and ally, where I would just ping him on the side and be like, what does that mean? And it was usually something so simple that added a lot of clarity. But yeah, acronyms, when people are very confidently using several in a sentence, I'm like, now I'm lost.
Wow, we've gone far today.
Did
What
we?
else? What else? I think so. Well, now you
Talked a
got me
lot about
second guessing myself. Am I impossible? Do I deserve to have a podcast? Like maybe I shouldn't be here.
we do deserve to have a podcast. And we do deserve to be writers of children's books. And we do deserve to do whatever it is our heart's desires are, even if we don't know the thing. I think like I would be more curious about different ways you like individuals can kind of sit through and think about imposter syndrome. Like the 15-minute reset is a mindful activity. And I'm curious if there are mindful activities that can help you figure out how to get through imposter syndrome. For those not familiar, the 15-minute reset is very short, very semi-guided-ish meditation where really you just get to a quiet place and then your thoughts can kind of level themselves out so you're not so overloaded. But I wonder if imposter syndrome, like, does it creep in only when you're like doing something new, or does it creep in at any time? Like, I feel like for me, it creeps in when there's a lot going on up there, and then it creeps in and it's like a playground. So, like, would any kind of mindful thing help? I don't know. I'm gonna experiment with that, I think, in the future.
Well, what came to my mind more than the mindfulness exercises was like a personal inventory, because
Mm.
sometimes you need to remind yourself even what you've done in the past, what you are capable of doing, what kind of skills you have. And it sounds very vain, but like I have been in a situation before, like, oh, I forgot I actually led a workshop similar to this in the past. Like I have done this before. And so it's like it's harder to talk yourself out of being an imposter if you don't know who you are. As crazy as that sounds. So I even think
Yeah,
like the SWOT analysis that we talked about in the previous episode to call out call back to SWOT it like it's hot. Um, like that might be helpful. Um, I don't know. But I think some kind of personal inventory though like, helps you remember reviewing your resume, updating LinkedIn, a stroll down memory lane, as I call it, when I go through my LinkedIn. Like, yeah, it worked. I did get that certificate. Oh, that one did expire. I never renewed it. That might be helpful.
that's a good point. A lot of times, the last things that we've done are the most prevalent in our mind, and we
Mm-hmm.
forget about all those things we have accomplished.
It's called the recency bias.
The recency bias is real. I think imposter
Mhm.
syndrome thrives. I'm like, imposter syndrome is now like a little cartoon character to me. It's like walking around looking for chaos brains, trying to grab his best friend, the recency bias, to bring him along.
Well, that's your next children's book. Perfect. It gives
comic
you inspiration.
comic book coming soon. What do you
Mm-hmm.
say? What do you say, Mr. Thomas? What else?
I, I don't know. I mean, I really do think you know yourself better than anyone else. And so, like, I don't mean to say that, like, you doing a SWOT analysis is going to just fix the problem for you because it might not. I don't mean to say that you doing some kind of mindfulness exercise is going to fix the problem because it honestly might not. Like some people might need a little pep talk. Like you might have a friend or a trusted mentor that you can go to when you're feeling this imposter syndrome, who can they can't make you like they can't tell you that you're not an imposter because only you can tell yourself that, but they can maybe help bring you back to a place of center, and they may be able to, share
Mm-hmm.
something with you, it's past experience or whatever. Like that might. I think it also depends a little bit on people's personality type, because I just did the personality test. I've done a million of these, but this one broke people into 4 groups: the power people, the party people, the peace people. I don't remember what the fourth group was. I was in the peace group, and I thought I would have been in the party group, but I was not. I was in peace.
What?
But peace people, as it sounds, want to keep peace and like help create homogeny and things like that. And so, like,
Yeah.
what worked for me is not going to work for the last was the analytical people, but I don't remember what their name was. But those people who like need to process things and like need to look at the pros and the cons and create lists and run the numbers and things like that. And I'd imagine the party people, like what will help talk a party person out of imposter syndrome probably is more like, let's just do it. Like, well, let's just do the darn thing. And like an analytical person is not gonna be like, let's just do the darn thing. Like that's gonna be more frightening for them. They may need
Yeah.
that SWOT analysis, that personal inventory to get through. And that's piece people might need that recentering with the mindfulness exercise, and the power people may need, I don't know, something else. And so um I think you gotta also have to look at yourself and say like, what will help me feel better in this kind of scenario.
I think that's a very valid thing. As with everything, I'm also super curious now about this one you did because I too would feel like I'm a party people, but maybe I'm not. I could see you
Mm,
as a peace people though.
I know, but the party people description was so much more fitting to me for
Yeah,
what I thought I was. But I there were definitely elements of peace that I was okay. This is totally off topic. Guys,
super off
you'll
topic.
have to wait for another podcast where we'll talk about that.
Who is doing the recap today?
Well, I'm looking for the name of this personality test, so I think
I'll take
you
the
can start
baton.
us off.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I am no imposter to recapping. All right, so in today's episode, we talked a lot about imposter syndrome, where it comes from, what can we do about it, and side storied a couple things along the way. So, imposter syndrome, we really talked about the critics of the folks around you that are fueling your imposter syndrome, and are you your own worst critic? What's going on that's keeping you from doing that thing that you like? We also talked about how imposter syndrome could really suck the joy out of the thing that you're doing when it gets scary or unknown. And we talked a lot about um, the unknown or ambiguity really playing a role in feeling imposter syndrome. We also talked about a sense of comparison or feeling inferior, like if you're in a group of folks where you don't feel like you are the most educated or articulate or the most uh, what's the word I'm looking for? Qualified. You could have imposter syndrome, but we have talked about plenty of tools to kind of get ourselves out of these headspaces so that we could get back to our confident land. So, the first thing we talked about is it's okay not to know. It's okay that if there is a lot of ambiguity or there are uncertainties, it is first okay that you do not know. And we talked a couple of ways to kind of battle that perfection. The first is to notice that you are trying to be a perfectionist and maybe try to shift that away from perfection to getting to good enough, really, to making sure that you get to that place where things are good enough. And we talked about a book called Ish that we can send a link in the description below. We also spent a lot of time and thought that this might be one of our most powerful tools if you're ever in a scenario where there's a bunch of unknown is to get quiet and use your levels of listening to benefit you in those scenarios. So, really focus on listening to learn and listening to internalize so that you can state back what you've heard or state back what some of the underlying messages are that have been said but maybe weren't heard by the group. We also talk about powerful questions. This keeps popping up in most things that we do. So if you are in a place of imposter syndrome, don't be shy to lean on those powerful questions. And also don't be shy to lean on those powerful questions if you're helping someone get through their imposter syndrome. Help support them and guide them so that they can practice, 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 and get to be the best that they could be. We used a few examples, one of those being acronyms. We're going to have a follow-up show just on acronyms. Thomas isn't aware of that, but he's going to be out sick that day. We'll come up with a great list of characters that will convert into...
I'm already feeling it. I'm coming down with it already.
Lastly, we did talk about how personal inventory, going back to the SWOT analysis, can be helpful to help you re-celebrate your successes and reaffirm your abilities in doing whatever it is that you're doing to kind of battle this imposter syndrome that likes to come out and play with us sometimes. So remember to practice these techniques, and remember to be brave. Just be brave when you're doing whatever it is that's hard, because you can get through hard things, as we all do.
The last thing I would say is also sometimes maybe you are an imposter. Like sometimes just lean into it. Like I think there have been a lot of spaces where there's been a certain type of person or a certain caliber of leader that has worked in that room, and maybe the times are changing. They need an imposter. You never know. Like I guess what I'm saying at heart is like, no matter if you are an imposter or aren't, we can't let imposter syndrome hold us back, because there's so much that we need to do, and we are absolutely the right people to do it.
We
Whether we've
totally
done it
are.
before or not, we are still the right people.
That is incredible. Well, thank you, Transformers. We will see you next time. Goodbye, my imposter
I
friends.
can't wait till next week. Hopefully it's not my sick week. Bye,
TTYL.
everybody.